fourth tour event, the Community Opioid Response. And this is a group of folks in the greater Brattleboro area that have been looking at the issue of opioid use, abuse, recovery, treatment, prevention, intervention. And we hold quarterly events. This is our fourth one. And I would just like, first of all, to thank the core teams. So if everybody who's in it could stand up. Brian, Jedediah, Jeff, me, I'm Robin Briscoe from the Department of Health, Cassandra, the APC, Susan Avery. And we have a mailing list in the back, so if you're interested in getting more information from us in the future, please give us your email address. Tonight we are going to be having a conversation about, the question is, why don't they just quit? And to really have people talk about their experiences with addiction. And that often, there's a lot of stigma around addiction, so we really want to talk about ways that we can address this as a physiological, biological issue. And Geoff is, Dr. Kane is from the retreat, and he's a doctor of addiction, and he's going to talk a little bit more about that. And then we have our speakers tonight who will be introduced. We are filming this event tonight, so Reggie, thank you. He's also part of the core team from BCTV. Substance abuse is a very personal issue for us, and for everybody here tonight, it's really important that we maintain confidentiality. So if you are going to share, please know that you are on BCTV. And if you talk about somebody else who's not in the room, to not identify them or say things about them that will make them identifiable, because it is important that people have their confidentiality. There's a box in the back, a pink box back there. If you want to ask any questions and you don't feel comfortable asking them out loud, you can put them in the box and we will get to that. There's also resources back there, a variety of information about places for people to get help. We also have some prevention resources back there. That's the field that I'm in. I believe very much in the work of prevention. We also have recovery resources and treatment resources. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Geoff, and he can tell you to see it.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming tonight. This is a great turnout. As Robin said, my name is Geoff Kane. My background is medicine, public health, and addiction medicine. I live in Brattleboro. I work at the retreat. And our panel, I'll just go down the table by name. I'm going to leave it to them to introduce themselves and say a bit about their backgrounds. But Suzie Walker, Brian Condon, Ella Thorne-Thomsen, Paul Sinsigalli, and Jed Popp. And we've all got our name tags that were nicely produced for us. We think of these series as having to do with learning and sharing ways to think and talk about addiction. And in the Community Opioid Response Committee, our code word for tonight was the word choices. To what extent is addiction a choice? To what extent do people have the ability to choose to use or not once they become addicted? And sort of where do we draw the line there? So choices will be one of the words that we'll be coming back to, and we would invite you to come back to. I'm going to ask each member of the panel to take 5 minutes or so to say a bit about themselves and their perspectives on where choices do or do not fit in. To just warm that up a little bit more, we'll be talking about choices, but also behavior and choices about behavior, and also words like responsibility and accountability and values. A quick definition of behavior, human behavior, would be anything you could see me do or observe about me. If I were riding a bike or talking with a friend, that would count. But also more bodily functions. Breathing is a behavior. Blinking my eyes is a behavior. So, and ordinarily I don't make choices about blinking my eyes. I just do it naturally over the course of the day. Although I can make a choice and bat my eyes at someone. and that would be a choice governing that behavior. I could get in a staring contest with someone and just not blink my eyes. there'd be a limit to how long I could keep that up or how long she could keep that up. But if I'm trying to stare with all my might in this juvenile staring contest, if something happened that took me by surprise, I would blink on reflex. So the nervous system can overpower my determined choice just because that's how the nervous system works. So this would be stuff for you to think about. Now, let me ask the panel to say a bit about themselves and their perspective, but what we're hoping for is a community discussion where you might make comments or ask us questions, and we'll do our best to respond to those. We may ask you questions. As Robin said, this is being video recorded. If you're an aspiring performer, know that your back's to the camera, and it will stay that way unless you do something different. So that gives you some privacy, but I guess you can sort of change that as you will. But let's just go down the table and start with Suzie.
Okay, thank you, Geoff. Thanks, everyone. My name is Suzie Walker. I'm the director of the Turning Point Recovery Center here in town, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And for me, that means I haven't had a drink in 19 and a half years. And I've been thinking about the topic of choices and how it relates to, long before I got in recovery and now. I grew up in an alcoholic family, and so I always saw it and had just kind of determined, I am not going to be like that man. I am not going to do these things. And then when I went to college, to Texas Christian University, where I learned all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, I saw people drinking seemingly with impunity, and I thought, well, okay, people do this. And so I did. And not once did I ever drink like a normal person, whatever that is. Not once did I ever drink socially. But when I drank for the first time, it was as if I had exhaled for the first time in my life. It gave an effect that I really needed for what I eventually learned was a lot of anxiety and depression stuff. So I began drinking, and for me, I was a binge drinker, so I made the choice to not drink a lot, over and over. And I would drink for some period of time and then just decide. I was always starting a clean slate. But for me, what I had was like a wheel of fortune, spinning wheel of choices. And if I stopped drinking, I might smoke something for a while. Or I might just totally throw myself in my career to the point that it was just ridiculous. Or into a relationship. There was always something else going on. Whether it was conscious or unconscious, I was constantly changing things. And so I would drink for a while and then I wouldn't, maybe depending on the people I was hanging out with. And then it started to get scary, and so I started to deliberately say, okay, well, this is scary and I'm not going to do this anymore. And I can remember times driving home from the grocery store and noticing that I had a 12-pack of beer in the car or a bottle of wine, and I'd be like, oh, I guess I'm doing that again. It wasn't a conscious choice to do it. I just kind of grabbed for it, and then I would be off to the races. And even when I got in recovery at the end, I was a binge drinker. So it didn't seem like alcohol was my problem because there were the periods of time when I didn't drink. But I did eventually get in recovery and start to make different choices. And what I was reminded of today was something called Recovery Capital. And in our peer recovery center, we talk a lot about the recovery process and about building recovery capital. And I'll just read you a couple of the kinds of things that this means. It means that I have a sense of purpose in life, that I can cope with the stresses in my life, that I am free from worries about money, I am comfortable dealing with a range of people, I am proud of my home, I cope well with everyday tasks, just the kinds of things that you wouldn't necessarily think about. But these were the kinds of things that could just become overwhelming and crippling to me. So even though I was succeeding in my career and on the outside in a lot of ways I looked okay, I really wasn't. And when I finally made the choice to get help, because at 3 a.m. I decided I had social anxiety disorder because I saw it on TV, I found out I didn't know I would never have a drink again. And when I went to treatment, I heard people all day long talking about the exact things I felt on the inside, the exact things I would never say out loud to anybody. And I identified with them, and I saw that they had a joy and a courage and an authenticity that I wanted, because the life I was living was so far from what I felt on the inside of me. So for me, pardon me, the process of recovery has been bringing all the parts of me back together. That along the way, all those years when I was drinking and doing all those other things, I was leaving little pieces of me by the side of the road. And through the recovery process, I get to call it all back. And so it's simply not as easy as saying it's a choice that we make to harm ourselves, because we might make a choice to pick up whatever or to engage in a behavior because we're having some kind of discomfort or pain. And this is the thing that I know that works. Today in my life, I know a lot of other things that work. I know I can meditate. I know I can confide in a friend. I know I can go outside for a walk. But I didn't have that knowledge or those skills at the time. And so now today at the center, it's just a real privilege to be able to work with people and help them come to their own awareness about making choices, and really the choice to know when to ask for help is just enormous. And there you go.
Thank you, Susie. I think one of the other things I would ask you to pay attention to as we sort of listen to personal stories is diversity. I think Susie's account of, well, I made lots of choices. I was a binge drinker, which I made lots of choices not to drink, but then went overboard when she did. And also had behavior like packing in beer and wine from the supermarket without making a conscious choice. So that all registered with me and is part of what we're up against. Brian.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Brian Condon. A few different roles. I work at Turning Point, been there for 4.5 to 5 years. Various roles. Currently, I'm a recovery coach, and I do trainings there. I also, today was my last day as project manager of a state grant working for the Vermont Recovery Network. Gave my 1 month notice, and things good, much off my plate. But I'm also an addiction counselor at Habit OpCo here in Brattleboro. That's will be my full-time job. I'm also a person in long-term recovery from alcohol addiction, and I drink normally normally whatever you call normal as a teenager. I drank a lot, but not it wasn't any more than anyone else. I didn't have an issue or whatever. It wasn't until my lifelong anxiety in my 20s kind of peaked and I started having panic attacks in my mid-20s that I started to self-medicate with alcohol, which didn't really help the anxiety much, but it kind of took my mind off it maybe. But I was finally diagnosed with an anxiety disorder a couple years later and treated relatively successfully, but I just didn't stop drinking. At that point I liked it, and I really just loved the euphoria and stuff, and I continued drinking for another close to 20 years, progressively getting worse. And I knew for the majority of that time that I had a problem, and I also been real long. I knew I was an alcoholic. I didn't debate that, or I wasn't in denial in any way. I knew it, and I'd take care of it one day, tomorrow, next year, or whatever. But eventually I did make the choice to get treatment. Or speaking of the topic of choice, in some ways choices are made for us. And this kind of my choice to get treatment finally was precipitated by getting fired from my job, my long-term job. I was a pretty high-functioning alcoholic for a while. Thank you. For quite a while, and but that doesn't last forever. And when I got fired, I checked myself into the Brattleboro Retreat, to the detox facility. And at that point, my eyes were yellow because my liver was in such bad shape. I was drinking hard vodka really for quite a few years, and it was just a bad situation. I was in pretty sad shape. So you could say that maybe that choice was made for me, or it took that much to be in that kind of situation to make me get help or whatever. But I did, and it's been next month will be 5 years since my last drink, and recovery is amazing. Working at Turning Point and doing the kind of work I do is just amazing. That getting to work with people and stuff. It was like in that time in detox that I decided to change my career in retail management that I've been in for 26 years, and I just instantly wanted to start helping people, other people with addiction. I'm not sure where that came from in just a few periods or whatever, and I wasn't quite ready to start that. I remember I went to a outpatient program at the retreat after I got out of detox, and I was telling my counselor that I wanted to be a counselor, an alcohol and drug counselor. And she made a comment about putting the carriage before the horse and stuff, but it's like, okay, yeah, I see that point, but I had chosen my career, my passion, found it, and I'm doing it now. And recovery can bring things like that. A lot of people, like some of the questions that we have, people be talking about today is like, why don't they just stop? My then wife told me that her mother said to her, it's like, Brian knows the drinking's bad for him. Why doesn't he just stop? And my response was kind of very sarcastic, like, gee, thank you. I had never thought of stopping. It's like that concept, so, they're problem solved. And because it's simply not that easy, choice, there's so many other factors in it, and just choosing something and keeping with it is an entirely different matter, I think it was Robert Downey Jr. that made a comment that, it's easy to stop, drinking, using drugs or whatever. The hard part is not starting again, and I can't tell you how many times I decided, nope, that's the last drink, I'm never going to do that again, and whether it be an hour later or a week later or whatever, it happened, So it's just a matter of finding, choosing, and then maybe taking the actions, I believe. The fact that I started working really hard towards my recovery and doing really everything I could, made the big difference. But it is, I understand all these questions, like why don't they stop and don't they care, and sort of the family or whatever, but I guess one thought I had too reading the description was, especially like, don't they want to stop for their family and things like that? It's like, everyone I've worked with, and I've worked with probably a couple hundred people at this point, with addiction, they want all that, but it's hard to explain, but it's just not that simple, and like, as far as like choosing something for the betterment of your family and things like that, sometimes there's so much shame involved with it, and self-loathing and stuff that, that I can't do that, and they don't need me anyways, and there's all kinds of things that go through people's minds at a time like that is going to affect, whether they're motivated enough or brave enough to ask for help. That's a huge part too, getting out to do that. Yeah, that's everything I had. Thank you.
Brian?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Brian. One of the things Brian said was sometimes choices get made for us or for people, and the whole issue of accountability is something that it's worth reflecting on. It's important that we not judge people who have addiction. It's also important that we hold them accountable for their behavior if they're going to change that behavior, and that worked out very well for you.
Yeah.
What Brian said about family, job, personal safety versus more substance, the neuroscientists have obtained evidence that in an individual with active addiction, what they call the motivational hierarchy gets turned upside down. So things that they might declare they feel most strongly about, like personal safety and family and community, take a back seat to more substance. More substance seems to have more, they use the word salience, more immediate importance. And one reason is because it's going to provide a bigger boost of dopamine in their pleasure center. The burst that people get from addictive substances is like 5 times more of a hit than food or sex. And that reward brings people back, and as Suzie was saying, that detachment or relief from pain brings people back. That's what trains this primitive part of the brain to do it again. So, more to think about. Ella.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kane. My name is Ella Thorne-Thomsen, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. I haven't used heroin in over 5 years now, and really big piece of my recovery was the choice for me to utilize some of, actually along the way, the reason I'm here is because the things that I did have a choice about were the choice to enter treatment, the choice to not give up, the choice to use the tools that were available to me, the choice to keep trying, basically. Because for me, early on in my life, I kind of realized, as a kid, I had this theory in my head that I was allotted a certain amount of happiness in any given amount of time. That in a week, in a month, in a day even, there was a certain amount of happiness that I could have. And if I had like a really, really good day, I was guaranteed later that week that I was going to be sad. For me, I now know that's biological for me. That's something that I got from my gene pool. And some other behaviors that came along that kind of made life really hard for me that I didn't have a choice about. This thing rose up in me at the age of 13 that turned into an eating disorder that stayed with me for half my life. And made me hate myself day in and day out, and made me really unhappy. And the one thing, I was trying to choose a life that I liked. I was trying to choose life. But I didn't know how to do that. But I did know how to choose to feel better for a little bit, which I didn't learn until I was like, I don't know, in my teens. I learned that these substances would make me feel better for a little while. And then those other things that were important to me, doing a good job, at my work, being connected to my family, were that much easier for me because I had this little bit of strength and these moments of relief during the day where I could gather my strength and say, okay, so I'm not excited to get up tomorrow. So I'm really dreading this, that, and the other, and I know my heart feels like 1,000,000 pounds in my chest right now, but I have a secret weapon. I have something to look forward to. It wasn't until I had other things in my life to look forward to that I was able to pull away from that strong relationship in my life with those substances. For myself, the choice was there only really early on. The choice to use drugs, like when it was just that to use or not to use, it was there only early on, because later on the choice was, do I hurt these people who are backing me, who really don't want me to do this to myself? The choice became, do I get a little bit of strength and keep going on, or do I try to? I had 3 years of clean time in my late teens, early 20s. I chose to go into treatment because I was really. Actually, I was scared straight. That was really helpful. I got a choice that I did not have was I got arrested a couple times in really quick succession. Once for possession, a couple times for driving without a license. And I got really, really scared of ruining the rest of my life by having a record that would stick with me. I knew I had, and that I wasn't going to have the people in my life that were supporting me at that moment. If I kept going, I was going to lose those things. And those still, they meant something to me then. But later on, when I had 3 years of clean time where I was never happy to wake up. Every day was still, I was consumed with urges and cravings, despite the choices that I made to go to these intensive outpatient treatment programs, these partial hospitalization programs, the choice I made to see a therapist, to see a psychiatrist, to follow their instructions, to use these tools. I was trying. I made those choices, and I wanted to choose to be happy with that. And that wasn't there. That was not a choice that I got to make. Whether chemically or whatever it was, that one was out of my hands. And I ended up going back out. And then that time around, the weird thing was when you break and lose all the things in your life that are important to you, the people that you care about have already turned their backs on you, or are keeping you, way farther than arm's length. And you think that your future is already ruined. What are the chances? When you feel worthless already, there's really the choice to use. It's really not that hard to make, because what's the one thing, for me, it came down to, okay, what's the one thing left I'm afraid to lose? My life? No, not really. That would kind of be a perk, sort of. So my life was a frame that made it a rational, sensible choice for me to use, because it gave me a little bit of peace. Gave me a little bit of something good in my life, terrifying though that may be. And what ended up happening is I met someone who found a way to be happy without drugs or alcohol in their life, and they had previously had a real problem with substance abuse disorder. And I didn't believe that that was possible. I had chosen to go to AA and NA and 12-step meetings and all these things and during those few years clean in my early 20s, I was going to 3 meetings a day. I was literally trying everything I could, and it wouldn't break. That heaviness just wouldn't break. And I kind of followed this person around for a while, and eventually was allowed, if people gave me the choice to take back the things in my life that were valuable to me, some of those relationships, some of those opportunities. I mean, I didn't get to say what I actually do for work, but my job is I work out of the Turning Point of Windham County here, the Peer Recovery Center that Susie's the director of, as a pathway guide. And the pathway program Brian was my project manager until mere moments ago. It was created through a federal grant, now a state grant, to help people in recovery from opiate addiction figure out what tools can help them find the path to recovery that makes them happy. And one of the things that we really know that helps is using medication-assisted treatment modules like methadone, buprenorphine, and the Vivitrol shot. And for myself, I got on methadone, and that gave me a break from the biological, chemical imperative that there is to use when you're sick and when you're really, in withdrawal. The choice to use it doesn't feel like a choice anymore. It feels like it's necessary. But I gave myself a break from that, and I got to choose to find other things that made me feel good about myself and made me excited to get up in the morning. And for the most part these days, and that gave me the freedom to figure out other tools that can help me deal with the hard stuff that is still there, that I didn't have a choice about. So I got to learn, I got the chance to live my life again, to take my life back, and as Suzie said, pick up those pieces of ourselves of myself that I left along the wayside. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ella. I guess I'm an old-timer in addiction medicine now, but I once heard an old-timer in addiction medicine say that the only predictor he knows of success in recovery is persistence. And Ella, in her story, is the picture of tenacity and persistence. And rock on. Paul. Thank you.
Hi guys, my name's Paul. I work in healthcare. I've been clean from heroin for 4 years, just about 4 years now, and I've been off the methadone for 3 months. And that was a long taper and pretty painful, but getting off it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I feel pretty good now. My beginning was a little different. Everything, normal childhood, I think. During high school I started smoking a little bit, stuff like that. It was after 9/11 I went in the Army and I was in the infantry, went overseas, and what goes on with the war. So I came back, and right away it was just sitting around dwelling about stuff all day. How could things have been different? And I very quickly found this one substance that made me sit on the couch and really not think at all, which was great for a little while. I made that choice to use, the first few times, and pretty quickly after that it became like a full-time job. Once you got your stuff for the day, you're thinking about how am I going to get my stuff for the next day, and it really was like all consuming. It took over everything with my life. I have a family, a couple young kids and stuff like that. My daughter was just a baby at that time. I made the choice to take the money that was, giving her food and stuff like that, and I did it. I knew there was going to be consequences, but I didn't feel like I had a choice. I did it because I had to. The disease it just took over everything about me, and I know, like Brian said, like Brian said, it's like, why don't they just stop? It was like people close to me were like, well, why don't you just stop? And I'm like, it's not like a light switch. You can't just turn it off and on, and for me, addiction is like right up there with cancer in my book. It's a really terrible disease. I've seen it take almost everything from me. It took everything from many people. And like she said, it almost would have been a relief if it took me, but it didn't. And I, through many programs, PTSD programs and rehabs and detoxes and all that stuff, I finally put it together somehow at how I stopped, and I made that decision one day. I wasn't going to pick up again, and it stuck. I was going to the methadone clinic after I'd already been kicked out of it from not stopping, and I went back. They took me back. I kept going every day, making the choice to go and making the choice to not pick up. And then for me, I started getting those clean drug test results, and it started building on my confidence. Like, wow, I've actually been clean for a whole week, and then 2 weeks, and it just built up, and it started feeling good. It really started feeling good. And then after, months and months of that, people around you start, for me, they started noticing a difference and things like that. It just helped me keep going, and then I started feeling a lot better about myself. And my self-esteem, everything started coming back slowly, and I still feel different almost every day now. Still, it's a constant process. Consequences for my choices, I knew there were consequences. Like I said, I couldn't stop. I really couldn't. I tried many times. I would go to bed at night, say I'm done, that's it. I wake up in the morning, and it didn't matter. I was off to the races again. It was like I didn't even think about it the night before. Let's see, what are some of the other ones? Like choosing drugs over my family too. It was, I just did it because I had to do it, because I couldn't sit there and dwell on that stuff all the time and deal with the anger and the irritability and everything else that went with having PTSD. It just, it really just took over everything. That's pretty much all I have to say about that. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. A very authentic picture of the desperation that people can face with addiction, valuing family and knowingly getting drug because I had to do it. And that's where addiction happens. It happens in the primitive, instinctual part of the brain. I sometimes quote a young man who says, when I'm active with addiction, I use like my life depends on it. It can be that kind of an imperative, and at that primitive a level in the person and in the brain. Jed.
Thank you. My name is Jed Adaya. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Got to get it really close.
Get really close. Like
Yeah.
this, okay.
You'll know.
I'm a recovering heroin addict. I've been in recovery for about 5 years with about 4.5 years clean time. I was IV drug user for many years. I feel like, talking about choices, growing up in poverty, youngest of 7 kids. A couple of my older brothers have, at that point, had some drug problems, and my parents never told me how to process emotions, how to express myself, and I always felt I was different from other people. I could see people around me at school, having a good time and just being happy, and I felt awkward. I didn't know what I was feeling, and people have told me that that's normal when you're a kid, but I mean, it was pretty rough for me. I was just had constant anxiety, and it just was hard. So when my teenage years came around, I hung out with a couple of friends, and when pot comes around, you're like, yeah, I'll have some of that, and drinking, and that's what it was like, and that's the point where I felt I didn't have a choice, because that's what was going on at that point in my life. And that first moment that I drank, that I smoked pot, that I tried cocaine, that I used heroin, that I took pills, that I picked up a needle, and I picked up a crack pipe, my life got better and better and better each time. And And so I kept that, thinking back, did I have a choice back then? I really didn't think about it as a choice. It just was a way of life for me, and I see that happen today in the world and in my work. And it's kind of, it's sad, when people don't have that choice, or they don't, to put it other ways, I didn't know there was a different way of life. I just did not know that. When I remember I was driving to work one day, and I was working in a restaurant over in Manchester, Vermont, and it was a pretty good restaurant, it's good food. People depended on me for what I did, and we were like a tight group of people. But I was going through some pretty bad withdrawals at that point. And that was the first time in my life when I said, I just can't do this. I can't do this anymore. And I went and I kept using, because that's all that I knew how to do. I didn't know anything about recovery. I didn't know anything about addiction at that point in my life. I didn't know that it could get worse. And then it got much worse. When I met a woman that I was engaged to for 9 years, 3 years into that relationship, she thought she could fix me, and take my advice that you can't really fix anybody. You got to let them go through the waves. But I remember taking rent money and going and going out to the dealer's house down the road. I did that once, then I did it again, and then we got evicted. Moved into the next apartment, did it again, got evicted. So that part of me I never once said, hey, let's go pay the rent so we can have a place to stay. It was about me, and it was about making myself feel better. And is that selfish? Kind of, it is. I'll be honest, it is selfish. And I paid for that. I was accountable for those times when I got into recovery, and I dealt with that with shame and guilt and fear. So I do think it is important to be accountable to some extent for our actions, because I wouldn't be here today if I was not accountable for my actions. So there was about 9 years from the first time I went into recovery to when I actually got a hold of something. And in those 9 years, I lost everything. I worked myself into this 1-bedroom apartment with blankets all over the windows. I mean, the smell, there's no electricity. And I had no food, nothing, just dark, lonely, sad. And I didn't care about eating. I just cared about using. And it's insane. It really is. When I did finally get it, one day I'm like, I just can't do this anymore. I can't do this. And I got out of the town that I was living in, and I had some success over here before, but it didn't last. And there was one thing that I didn't try, and that's getting connected with people. So at that point in my life, I was pretty desperate, and that was my first good choice. It's going to the Turning Point. I will promote the Turning Point here, but it's a great place to go and meet people. And I found, my first recovery coach who really had some hope for me. And that hope is what I used and was able to make, healthy choices from that point forward. So, today, I worked my way up. I went to the Turning Point. I was a volunteer. then I became a recovery coach, then I became a pathway guide, and then I work at HCRS now as a case manager. And I love everything that I've done. And these things are coming into my life because of the good choices that I made. I'm able to see, over these past 5 years, I'm able to see that, number one, I'm getting to know myself better, but I'm getting this picture of choices over when I was actively using and when I got into recovery, and there's a big difference. And I don't think there was anything anybody could do for me. I still talk to that my ex, my fiance, every single day. We haven't been together for 5 years. She had to leave me. We talk every day. She lives 1,500 miles away, and it's special when something like that happens. It's special that there's people in this community that can come out here and have this discussion, because these are choices that we can make, is to come together to have this discussion. I'm getting off topic here of me, but it's something that's very hard to understand unless you've been through it yourself. But we can have empathy for people because we're starting to speak up about it. It's an honor being up here, and it's an honor talking to you guys about this and being up here with these guys too. But I hope we can get some questions today. That will only start if I give up the microphone.
Thank you, Jed. I'm glad that we're talking about recovery as well as about addiction. And Jed's emphasis on hope, which is an important place to start. And I also think of Turning Point as a place for people to experience acceptance and hope. And also, Jed emphasized that one of his turning points was making connections with people. I guess I'm telling old stories tonight. In 1974, I encountered the saying that the treatment of addiction is people. And throughout my professional career, that's turned out to be true and true and true. We have lots of new techniques and medications now that we didn't have that long ago, and they do make a difference. And the treatment of addiction is still people. So we want to invite you all to raise questions or make comments. I don't know if we want a microphone for the audience.
And I'm also going to pass around a box. If you just click card if you want to fill out a question, there are pens on the inside. And just a reminder, just talk into the mics because they're
Hold it close. And threats seem to work sometimes as far as getting people into recovery. I will threaten you. I will start asking you questions if you don't ask us questions.
Brave man over in the back.
Hi, my name is Billy. I'm currently in recovery. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I don't have necessarily a question, more of I want to just touch on choices. I don't think anybody intends to become an alcoholic. I don't think anybody starts their life to look forward to becoming a heroin addict or addicted to opioids or destroying their life or their family, losing their job. It's something that happens over time, circumstances, maybe you have a traumatic event. It can get very serious. My story, I'll keep it very brief, but I had multiple things go wrong. I had a relationship breakup that broke my heart. I had a loss of a job. I was drinking all the time. I started drinking when I was 14. Just partied, went to college, partied more. And then later on it was social drinking. And before you know it, I was having to have a drink in the morning because I was waking up shaking. I have some physical problems where I'm in chronic pain, so my doctor prescribed me oxycodone. That went fine for probably 2 months, and then I found out that the dosing that I was having was only lasting me 2 weeks, so now I'm buying off the street. So now I'm spending money on it, and then if I didn't have that, then I'd go look for Suboxone so that I could feel better, because the pain that's associated with coming off of alcohol or an opioid, heroin, is very painful. It's painful to your mind, full of hurt, your body aches, you lose hope, you feel worthless, you don't want to get up and do anything, you start neglecting, you start pointing the finger, you start blaming people. So what I just wanted everybody to get out of this is it can get very bad. I came minutes from killing myself because of this. So I'm in a very good place right now under tremendously professional caregivers, and I'm feeling good. But what I just want everybody to know is that we can make choices to change ourselves and our direction on where we're going. We can choose to abstain, but it's hard work, and you'll probably relapse, but you gotta keep getting up and trying again and trying again.
Persistence again.
Persistence. But I just want to make it clear that nobody chooses this life. It just happens over time.
Thank you. And it's a painful life, as Billy described, when people are in the thick of it. Anyone on the panel want to comment or respond?
Yeah, I thought of a couple of things as far as choices go, and choosing, your substance over or friends or your job or whatever. And I remember in my drinking years, toward the end, I started letting go. I tried really hard to do all the things I was supposed to do, and I started letting go of everything that was important to me. Slowly, I let go of hobbies, I let go of people, I let go of community involvement. My world got really small, and at the end, I was the only one in it. It was me and my job. And what would happen for me at the end is I would wake up and it would be kind of dim outside, and I wouldn't know if it was like 6:30 in the morning or 6:30 at night. And I would be so relieved when it was 6:30 at night and I didn't have to go out into the world. And that isn't who I was typically. And if I did wake up and it was actually morning, I would somehow get myself dressed up and off to work. And at the end, I would get all the way there, drive in the parking garage, and turn around and go home, because I was too afraid and too full of shame to go in and see the people I'd worked with for 10 or 11 years at that point who loved me, one of whom shook me by the shoulders one day and said, "Who are you and what have you done with Suzie?" Because it changed me. And it reached a point where I simply couldn't stop. But for all those years, it was my solution. It worked for me. It did something for me. And at the beginning, I thought it kind of took away this wall that I always thought was between you and me, that sort of social anxiety. But at the end, it had just built this iceberg between us that just took a lot of effort and time and people. It took people and compassion. When I got into recovery, one thing you hear a lot is you need to change your playgrounds and your playmates. And I thought, well, I've been isolating, so that doesn't apply to me. And my sponsor said, well, you know what that means for you is you have to get plugged out into the world again. And what a gift that you really can let go of it. And the other thing that occurred to me is I learned something about the phenomenon of craving. Because when I quit, and I know I'm blessed, but when I got it and I realized, oh, all right, it really is the alcohol, I have never had a craving. I have never had a thought of using again. And I know that's unique. And what you're hearing from all of us is that recovery and addiction are very personal and unique experiences. But what I learned in my first year of recovery is I had gone out to celebrate somebody's birthday and I had a dessert with liqueur on the top. And I didn't know it. And it was like this electric sizzle shot through my body. And it was just weird and freaky. And so I went home and called my sponsor. I said it was something called, I think it was tiramisu. And I said, do I have to like restart my recovery date and all that stuff? She's like, no, you just learned. You just learned what happens to your body with alcohol. So I remembered that along the way.
Thanks. Interesting thing about decisions to stop. Paul talked about making a decision that changed things. There is some research that when people make a commitment to recovery, they do better than when it's just sort of a good idea that they might do.
Thank you. I have a question. You just mentioned the individual nature of everybody's recovery. I have a question about complete abstinence in recovery and whether some people who have their primary drug of choice as an opiate perhaps can be in recovery and have beer now and then. There are some people that can do that. Well, I know it's advised not to. It's a slippery slope talk, but I'm just wondering what experiences other people have around the complete abstinence of all substances, especially with opiate addicts. Thanks.
Can I answer that real quick? Oh, does somebody else
Have at it. I'll go on for you.
I was just going to say, I should have mentioned that Turning Point recognizes all paths of recovery, which means that if you come in and you've got some path of recovery that's working for you, we want to support you in that. That might mean, and it is often a 12-step abstinence-based program, it might mean opiate medication-assisted recovery. You might have a faith-based program. You might have a lifestyle of yoga and meditation that works for you. You have somehow put together changes in your life to create a lifestyle that works for you and supports your recovery. And we have people that come to us for recovery coaching because they want to try and do moderation management, and it works for them. And I do know some people who used to do whatever. They used to shoot up whatever things, and now every once in a while they have a beer or smoke pot. But what we do is we look at the trajectory of their recovery. If they used to not be able to keep a home or a job, and their health was, in horrible shape, and now they've got a life, and they're part of the community, and they're a good employee and a good parent, and every once in a while they use a substance that doesn't seem to take them down that road again. Some people can do that, and some people don't flirt with it, or just it doesn't work. Like I said, I went back and forth a lot of times, and it never worked for me.
I have conversations that bear on this fairly often with people, and I meet people who are so deep into addiction that, and by their own report, taking one gets them right back into trouble. And for individuals like that, abstinence is really the only route. Now, that said, if their drug of choice is alcohol or heroin or whatever, they may get into recovery with or without medication to help them with that. But then, well, what about tobacco or other substances that, and in the community of addiction treatment professionals, there are arguments about this and debates about this. Is somebody really clean and sober if they're still smoking? Well, that sort of brings up the topic of diversity again, and as Suzie acknowledged, professionals are getting more and more comfortable dealing with that. I happened to be in a group the other day, and a gentleman next to me who was sober from alcohol and still smoking, and he turned to me and said, "Do I have to stop smoking too?" And I was kind of happy with my answer. I looked right back at him and said, "Well, how long do you want to live?" Making it a personal matter for his sorting out his own values and what he's going to do about it.
So one of the questions, I have a list of questions.
Oh,
Or did you want to?
no, go ahead, have at.
So I saw Mike just came in, so I'm going to put you on the spot with these folks here. This is a question in the box, not one I'm asking. How can we help law enforcement understand that drug addiction is a disease? So many law enforcement officials blame the drug addict. What is the answer to help them help the drug addict?
Pretty good question, right?
Oh, I'll answer that to my best ability. I think by having discussions like this, and having a great chief who's present at a lot of these discussions, I think that's a good start. For me, it's like I said, it's really good to have this turnout tonight and to have these discussions and to have people in recovery or people that struggle with addiction talk about these issues and these challenges and difficulties in their life, because then it makes it more real. It becomes a person rather than somebody on the news, you know, holding up the bank or breaking into a car. You know, it's a person. It's a person who has gone through some pretty tough situations in their life, and you know, and I just want to say one thing about what Billy said real quick. When I was in grade school, I never saw a person hold up their hand and say they want to be an alcoholic or they want to be a drug addict. You know, so it's really not a choice. And yeah.
I wanted to respond to the question about law enforcement. One of the really wonderful things we've been doing at the Turning Point lately, and in fact did as of noon this afternoon, we invited, we have these wonderful community meals every Wednesday.
Can't hear you.
Oh, thank you very much. So one of the wonderful things that we do at the Turning Point right now is for September, which is Recovery Month, we've been having these appreciation lunches every Wednesday. And today we appreciated the first responders in our community that have saved so many lives and ensured that people have another chance to get themselves into the life that they want without drugs and alcohol. And one of the conversations that I had with a young man, a firefighter today, was talking about, and it goes for police officers, all of these first responders, is they see one half of this equation. They see substance abuse, people with substance abuse disorders on their worst days, in their worst moments. That is all they see. They don't get to see that 5 years later, this person is alive and alight and has a job that they're excited about, and they get to help people and pass along this message. And one of the wonderful things that we've been doing is trying to, we've been inviting these folks into the Turning Point to get to see the other half, the amazing gift that they have given to so many people that they don't ever get to know about. I know so many people who would not have had a chance at recovery and at a life that they really like these days without a police officer, an EMT, firefighter showing up that day and having to deal with them at their worst. Because I know when I was using the sight of a blue uniform did not make me my most pleasant self. So yeah, and if I needed to, and if heaven forbid I had to call 911, I was not my most pleasant self either. So these guys, they have, for them to be able to see the other side, that okay, yeah, you might be getting, people may be hurling insults at you, they may not be happy to see you. Addiction looks like this sometimes, absolutely. But because of what you do, addiction can become recovery, and those people can have a life that is, for me, I can't even, it's so hard for me to understand that I am the same person that walked through my life using every day, all day, and being miserable. Like, that mental space is so far removed today that there's like this disconnect. They don't get to see that. So one of the things that we've been doing and that we can all do is show them the good that they have done and what amazing things are they give to a community, to a person, to a family. Yeah, so one thought.
Thank you, well said. I would agree we should reinforce the compassionate enforcement of the law that we have here in Brattleboro. I would also say that because the availability of substances contributes to use of substances, which contributes to addiction to substances and overdoses, I would offer law enforcement my greatest encouragement to keep doing all that you can to minimize the substances that are on the street, because that's sort of very different than the situation that people are in when they become addicted. Chief Fitzgerald?
Sure. Thank you. I'm Mike Fitzgerald, the Brattleboro Police Chief. Normally, if I'm not on a panel, I don't come in uniform because I don't get called out. Obviously, I have to change my tactics. I'd like to talk a little bit about what we are doing so everybody's informed on that. My stance has been for years and years that we're not going to arrest our way out of our problem, and we're just spinning our wheels. So a bit ago, I put into motion certain goals and steps, and we are not only achieving them, but we're going well and above beyond where I thought we would be today. So first of all, I agree wholeheartedly that we have to look at this multi-pronged. We have to get drugs off the streets, and we have to have aggressive enforcement. And with that, we redid our mission statement. And our mission statement basically reads, in a nutshell, I'll paraphrase, know the difference between those who need our help, those who make a bad decision, and those who choose to victimize others. So when we respond to a call, that's the mindset of our officers now. It's not, is an arrestable offense or non-arrestable offense? They now look at it, does this individual need our help? Did they make a poor decision? Or are they victimizing others? And our conduct now is going to be related to those three things. That has been an overwhelming success. I didn't come up with that, and that's what I'm most proud about. I talked to my staff, all my officers, sat them down, and said, look, this is what the community wants, this is what I want, how are we going to go about doing it? And the very first thing they did is got rid of those cookie cutter, protect, serve, police mission statements, and came up with this one. So I was very, very pleased with that. That was bottom up. So that's the kind of officers you have on the force, by the way. Really, really high caliber, good people. Second, we looked at, okay, we have an issue out here. We're going to be aggressive with the enforcement, but what are we going to do with the people that need our help or make poor decisions? How are we going to address that? First of all, we instituted things like, most recently, I'll start off with the outreach program. We went to Turning Point to get some representatives to be on the team. BMH, we went, they got some representatives on the team. HCRS, our police social worker for dealing with mental health, is on the team, plus an officer is on the team. And basically what they do is they go out in the community periodically just to stop and talk to where the areas of where everybody's hanging out and just talking to them. The reason and the goal behind that is when they're ready, I want to have someone prepared to do the intake. We realize we're going to get 99 no's. I get that. That's cool. But I don't want to miss that one yes. And we're doing everything we can to find that one yes. The next thing that we're doing is when someone ODs, you're now going to have an officer with the outreach team visit that individual or their family after the OD to sit down and talk to them and say, look, yesterday you had a really bad day, you OD'd, these are the resources available, what can we do to help you? And hopefully we'll get some yeses from that. And lastly, and this is the most unfortunate, when they're arrested, we're going to contact the outreach team. I have a saying, I say it all the time, it's not funny, but people think it's funny, but it's true. Everyone in handcuffs want to go to rehab. That is the God's honest truth. They go to the PD, they're in handcuffs. I guarantee you within 5 minutes they'll say, my life sucks, I don't like this, I need help, what can I do? What did we do in the past? Cell block 2 is open. Go in there and have a seat. You're there for 72 hours. You'll see the judge. When the judge is done with you, then you can go to detox or rehab or whatever you want. We missed a great opportunity there to say, okay, what can we do at this point? Now we have the teams in place. We also recently joined an organization, a national organization called PERI. It's a police-assisted addiction recovery initiative. And they have model policies, they have model functions that police departments can do to help working with people that are in detox and recovery and things of that nature. And that has been a godsend of knowledge, because I'm blind here, you know, we're just, what do we do? What do we do? A lot of good work has been done by Robin and Cassandra and Prudence in this area for the last year or so, and I just want to build on that momentum. So I went looking outside of our community to other places that really are struggling with the same issues we are. And here's what's beautiful about this. PERI contacted me, and they basically said, hey, we periodically go on the internet and just surf the net, and we really love what we're seeing in Brattleboro. Can we be of assistance to you? And this was probably 3 days after the select board meeting, when they said, okay, this is what we need to do to address some of the issues out in town. And it was a cold call to me from the executive director of PERI saying, we really like what we're hearing, we love what we're reading, what can we do to help you? I fell out of my chair. I was like, this is unbelievable. You know, this is absolutely unbelievable. So we've joined their organization, we've had a lot of phone conferences, and we're just continuing the momentum on what we're doing with that. So I didn't mean to monopolize, but that's pretty much what law enforcement's doing, but not so much what we're doing. I want to emphasize what you know what our philosophy is, and that's what I think is key here. Not so much of what we're doing, but what is our philosophy and what you can expect from us, and our attitude when we respond to any type of addiction-related crime, whether that be an OD, burglaries, because a lot of it is connected, same with mental health issues, things of that nature. We have really took a 180 look. We took off our law enforcement goggles and put on our humanitarian goggles and said, okay, what can we do here? When people are at their most vulnerable, that is when we can offer the most help. So that's what we got. Thank you.
I think as human beings, we become less self-defeating when our feelings, which by nature are partly conscious and partly unconscious, get integrated with our conscious decision-making. As communities, I think we become less self-defeating when various presences, forces in the community become integrated, and what Mike described as an integration of the police department with the humanity of the community in Brattleboro. It's sort of well stated and welcome and a helpful part of what we all can aspire to become more part of. And any other sort of questions, Robin?
Is there a suggested method to help a person realize that they do in fact have an addiction? And along with that, is there a suggested method that will compel a person to seek help?
I know, that's hard. This is a hard one. Well, you know, I can give you an example from my own family. My dad was the first alcoholic in my life. And, you know, he was like I was. He was high functioning for a while and able to do the things he needed to do. And then at some point it became obvious that wasn't the case any longer. And we had an intervention for him. And at that point we had to decide as a family, if you don't agree to go to treatment, this is how it's going to be. And so we went through the whole deal of reading our letters, and then at first he wasn't going to go, so we had to read the letters about, okay, so here's what's going to be different with me and my sister and my aunt and everyone. And so then he decided to go to treatment. So what we had to do is keep keep the conversation, but let them know this is because we love you and we see that you're in pain. And people did that with me as well. I know that in my family, again, my mom had started going to Al-Anon. I must have been a teenager. I just remember that I grew up on a farm, and we used to wait for my dad for dinner, and it sometimes could be 7 or 7:30. And what started happening is my mom would have to call all over town looking for him, and we would wait for dinner for Dad. And one night, she called us down for dinner, and I looked around and I said, well, Dad's not here yet. She said, your father knows what time dinner is, and this is when we're having dinner. And I was like, oh my God, Mom grew a backbone overnight. And what had happened is she had gotten help through Al-Anon and we stopped revolving around the disease in our family. And so the health started long before I personally even started drinking, but I saw examples of recovery in my life, and so I knew what to look for. And so I think it's amazing that part of the problem is, like our first responder friends, see the negativity of addiction all the time. And largely because so much of the recovery world is 12-step based. People get in recovery and then they just whoosh, they vanish into the anonymous world. And we don't know that when we're walking down the street every day passing people, that teacher is in recovery, that judge is in recovery, on and on down the line, we don't know that. So that the more people who come out and say, I'm a person in recovery, this is what it means for me, and this is how I did it, and this is how you can love and support others. So compassion and knowing the barriers, the boundaries, that you can't necessarily save someone, so sometimes you do have to do the tough love and just say, okay, you do what you need to do, but we're doing this. And that's how it changed the dynamic in my family.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's important to show understanding of the person, like no big judgments or you're a horrible person now and you're hopeless and things like that, because that's not going to help at all. But expressing concern and I've noticed, or we've noticed that you've been doing this or whatever, pointing things out in a gentle way and like offering support, but on the other side not enabling the person, not having boundaries, your own personal boundaries, and practicing self-care. So you're not, say, loaning them money or giving them money and stuff that you suspect maybe spent on drugs instead of whatever. So having the boundaries and not enabling, but offering support as unconditional as it can be, but protecting themselves.
And I was really, really lucky. My dad, I don't know if I'd be standing here today if it weren't for the relationship that I have with my father, which I've talked about a number of times. I can think of some people in the audience who are probably bored hearing this, one or two of you. But my dad, he figured out a way, what he would say to me, he would meet me for lunch every Wednesday when he wasn't working. I was living in Massachusetts at the time, in Greenfield, at the Greenfield Co-op at noon, and he'd get me lunch whenever he could, and he would just sit there and he would listen to me, and he would say, he's no good to me if I burn him up in my struggle, if I take everything that he has, if he starts to lend me money and burn him out, or if he starts to give more than he can, emotionally more than he can stand. What the heck good is he going to be to me if he ups and keels over with a heart attack from all the stress that I've given him? He can't help me. But he would say, and he still does, he says that he will never settle for anything less than me having a good life. And the way that he's able to hang in there because he protects himself, and he shows up. We still do lunch. It's on Sundays now. I still go down to the Greenfield Co-op. We have meet him at 11, and he buys me lunch and we talk. And back in the bad old days, he would try and make me laugh about whatever was going on, or just listen to me cry, or talk to me about this, that, and the other that had to do with his really eccentric hobbies and take my mind off things. And for every individual in recovery, recovery looks different. Each person's recovery is unique, and I wish that, I know everyone on this panel wishes that we had a formula that we could give you and say, this is how you do it. This is how you get someone to up and say, oh my goodness, you're right. I want to commit to a different way of living. but it doesn't go that way. But I do know that the one person that I stayed honest with, who actually had a chance of helping me, was my dad, because I don't know how he did it, but I never felt judged. I never felt like if I told him what was really going on, that I was going to have a reaction that would make me want to turn tail and run. I did want to protect him. I didn't want to hurt him. So I, would soften some things, but he hung in there with me and said, "I still love you." And it was something so precious to me. That was the one that gave me a lot of drive. That was really important to me, to have someone who I still loved and who I knew still loved me and cared about how things turned out. But he had to protect himself. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yes.
For you? Sure. Sorry. For me, what really helped with that was people close to me, I need gas money. They'd say, all right, meet me at the gas station, things like that, so they wouldn't give me cash. I was pretty resourceful. All addicts are very resourceful. I would pawn an iPad or something and, do stuff like that, and then go back the next day and get it back, and go down to the next pawn shop and have them buy it back again, and things like that. And so eventually my credit cards were taken away, things like that, by my loved ones. Really, it's just like the persistence and resilience with both the addict and the family, not necessarily giving up on, not giving up on the person, but really trying to not enable them, really. All right?
Thank you. I think what comes to mind when I hear that is, I think as humans, most of us anyway, don't want to see another person struggle, and we don't want to see another person go through pain, and it's hard, it's uncomfortable for most of us to be around that. I watched my mom struggle for many years, and I never understood what was going on until I got into recovery. If my ex's name is Jess, if she didn't leave and she just kept paying the rent or working things out, with the car payments, I probably wouldn't be here today. And I tell her a lot. Her leaving me was the best thing that ever happened to me. I was at a point where I had to make these choices on my own, even though some of them I couldn't, but I did in the end. And so she left, and she stuck with her boundaries, and that's very important, is sticking with boundaries when we're dealing with a loved one who's going through this, and we're like, what do we do? How do we show them that we love them? If I don't give them money, they're going to hate me. But it's really important that they have to go through this. But that doesn't mean that, like Ella was saying with her dad, it doesn't mean we have to stop loving them. It doesn't mean that we can't have empathy for them and say, yeah, I know that's got to be hard, what you're going through. I'm sorry that you're going through that. So it gives us a chance to get to know ourselves, and to, when we're sitting with those feelings that aren't comfortable by watching, another person suffer. It happens to me every day when I walk through town. How if I just gave somebody some money, it would make me feel a lot better. But that's not, I don't think for me, that isn't what worked for me. And I'm very thankful things worked out the way they did for me in my life.
Great question, great answers. Compassion, listening, lack of judgment, and lack of gullibility. Makes all the difference. For parents, it can be especially difficult. I can't count the number of times I've had the conversation with parents where I've been glad I didn't have to face the dilemmas that they face, but was able to empathize and offer a frame of reference rather than a stern, tough love approach. And the stakes are very high. I mean, a child can die very quickly with the drugs that we have around today, rather than take a tough love approach and say, all right, I'm done. Or the opposite, over-generous approach, or I'll take care of everything. To find some middle ground where there are limits, there are consequences, and there's an ability to regroup if expectations aren't met, or to celebrate if they are met and move on from there. There's a lot to be said for middle ground. I would also say in response to the question that for many years, probably since the late 1990s, early 2000s, healthcare professionals have had access to training in an approach to patient care that's called motivational interviewing. And the spirit of that was very evident in what this group said. And Ella's father sounds like a pro. It involves empathy and lack of judgment with the person who is ambivalent about making changes, and involves avoiding argument. If I replay my career in my head, there are lots of times I wish I'd avoided argument. Sometimes they call that rolling with resistance. And developing the discrepancy between what's going on. Okay, well, what do you want to do, and have you done that before, and what happened last time? Are you sure you want to do that again? Kind of reality testing what people want to do. And we've talked about hope, believing and expressing belief in the self-efficacy. You can do this. I believe you can do this. I don't know if you will, because that's going to depend on how you handle yourself. The spirit of motivational interviewing is perhaps most important, and that's been likened to an adult walking with a toddler. The focus is on the toddler. The pace is set by the toddler, but the responsibility for safety along the way and where they wind up is with the adult. And we can make a difference. It's important, though, to have the same kind of spirit we would have if we were walking with a toddler. Robin has another question.
Yeah, this is very related, and as a community organizer, I think this is a difficult question as well. We're talking about how we might deal with somebody in trouble with substances in our family or close to us. This is more about how we, as Brattleboro, deals with it. So how do we address the behaviors, for example, the public intoxication or public drug use, IV drug use, crime, or threats of danger, for example, behind Lester gun place, and still show compassion and empathy? Where do we draw the line as a community? So how do we show that same level of compassion when there are behaviors that are threatening?
I'll see what I can pull out of my boy, it is. That's a tough question, because my first year and a half in recovery, I found myself, and this is when I started to really get involved with recovery-based things. I found myself judging somebody else, and I don't need to go into detail. That's not what's important. But it was another person who was, is another addict, person living with addiction, and I stopped myself, and I'm like, wait a minute. I remember when I used to do the same thing. And I know a lot of people can't say that, but I can. And from that moment forward, I made it a strong goal of mine not to judge anybody. So, what I see of somebody and what they see of themselves are two completely different things. And it's a way of life. And, I have to respect that person's way of life. Now, once that way of life interferes with mine, then that's when I have to ask myself some questions on what I'm going to do with it. But you know, as a community, you know, I think it's really important, again, to talk about it, to talk about these things, because if we don't bring these issues up, then we're just going to continue to be mad about those things. There's certain things that I don't like, you know, about things that I see. But I find when I keep that inside, it kind of festers, and it becomes a negative thought, and I really don't like that. So I don't have an answer to that question, but I still have empathy for everybody, because once again, I don't know what people go through and what have gone through in their lives. And I say hi to every single person that I come into contact with, and I ask them how they're doing. Just about every person. And that's where my conversations start with people, and for me that works very well, because I you know, I don't know where that's going to lead down the road. You know, somebody may approach me, and you know, you never know what can start from that.
Thank you, Jed. We're just about out of time. Shall we try to take these two quick questions and then wrap up? Man at the back has the microphones there.
I think the last questioner was dealing with the issue of stigma. I think, and your response to it, I think was a good, I think a solid response. That person that we're maybe afraid of or suspicious, we don't want them hanging out in the back of wherever, or worry about the needles, or worry about. That could be your daughter. That could be your neighbor's son. It could be my daughter. In fact, my daughter is. So one of the lingering problems with this epidemic that we're coming to realize as it's moved into the middle class, particularly middle class white folks across the country, is that the old approach to arresting our way out of things, or looking down, making moral judgments about these people being failures, no good, losers, whatever, is a dead end. What we're really doing is making a moral judgment on a person who's in struggle, who's in pain. And I think we have to, every time we have this gut reaction, I know what you mean, you have a, oh, would we say the same kind, have the same kind of criticisms about the diabetics that we see in our life, or those with cardiovascular disease who also have a disease? And addiction is a disease. So I think it's important for us to step back and ask ourselves what that sense of unease is all about. So I think we're beginning to realize as a nation, certainly as a community, that we don't make a moral judgment on these people who have this awfully painful, difficult disease. That's all.
Thank you.
Follow-up on that, please?
I think we have to take one more question that we lined up, and then I have a final comment that speaks to what this gentleman just said a bit.
As somebody who serves on the select board, I get a lot of feedback from many different members of the community, and a lot of it does echo what that last question was. And the way that I have chosen to handle this is to speak to people, to go to the places that make you nervous, and just look. And some people are going to look away from you, but there's always going to be one that's going to look you in the eye, and that's the one that you walk up to and you speak with, and you hug them, you get their name, and you go back again. I do it every week. I go right down to that location. I have their version of a citizen's breakfast, citizen's lunch. You sit there, you talk to people, I know their names, and they're not scary when you know them. They're human when you know them. And I would recommend that the next time that you feel nervous, that you step forward instead of stepping back to meet somebody, and that might just help a little bit.
Thank you. We have to close. I have one last thing to share with people. I went to look something up today, and I found more than I expected, and I want to pass that along because it's quite relevant to what people were saying. It's more history, though. in 1974, a psychiatrist called E. Mansell Patterson was writing about responsibility and illness. And he was speaking of deviant behavior and reflected that if we see the deviant person as sinful, then the community has no responsibility. If we see the deviant person as sick, the individual seems to have diminished responsibility. If my leg's broken, I may not have to go to work to take the trash out for a few days. And that can interfere with the person taking responsibility for what they need to do for recovery. Patterson proposes that we view human behavior as both chosen and determined. Blame and punishment are not remedial. Therefore, we will not seek to impute blame. However, each person and each community must share responsibility. The community must be responsible and responsive to deviant problems. The socially deviant person must be responsible and responsive to his or her community. I think we've talked a lot about movement in that direction tonight, and I hope through this discussion and lots of other initiatives that we'll keep moving in that direction. Thank you all very much, and thanks to the panel.